We're live.
Okay, we're back after Senate Education, the 29th, we're back at back after a short break. And we have with us Councilman St. James to go through, walk us through a new version of H 930 on chronic absenteeism.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. You have draft 2.1 of your strike all amendment to H 930 as passed by the House. Changes between draft 1.1 and this new 1.1 and this new draft 2.1 are highlighted in yellow. And you can see there's not a lot of yellow in this draft. So the first change is on page 2. That previously said we're on H 930.
Oh.
Yep. There's only one bill that can do.
Thank you, Beth.
So on page 2, line 6, it was previously said in order to promote consistent school attendance and student success, and you've changed it into in order to produce consistent school attendance and student success. No changes to section 1120, the definition section. No changes, I'm on page 4, to section 1121, the compulsory attendance statute, or section 1122, which is the folks on either side of the compulsory attendance, moving them into the compulsory attendance requirement if they are actually attending school or enrolled in school. And then on page 5, section 1123, this is your school absence may be excused statute. This is where the laundry list used to live. And we've completely shortened subsection A. Yesterday, the draft you looked at had 3 subdivisions under subsection A, which was the lead-in language asks for the model policy to be followed when a school, a head of school or a superintendent is excusing an absence. And there were kind of 3 scenarios there. There was absence for all or part of the day, pre-planned family commitments, and then may ask for justification. And we had a lot of discussion yesterday, and just shortens that too. In accordance with the chronic absenteeism and truancy policy required pursuant to section 1124 of this chapter, the superintendent of a public school or designee of the head or designee or the head of school of an approved independent school or designee may excuse a student's absence for all or part of the school day and may request justification from an absence period. And then on page 6, section 1124, this is the model policy section. We've added to the list of folks the Agency of Education is required to consult with in developing the model policy, the National Association of Social Workers Vermont chapter, which was included yesterday, but I got the name wrong. I believe it's now correct. The Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and the Department for Children and Families Family Services Division. And then the model policy shall, I'm on page 6, line 10, subdivision 1. We had yesterday, this used to read, provide guidance for the reasons, etc. And then after all or part of the school day, it had including guidance regarding absences for pre-planned family commitments or activities, which the school has been notified in advance. And we've gotten rid of that language. And then on page 7, subdivision 2, this is where we had language that asked the policy to contain templates. And we've changed that to the agency shall also develop model procedures to accompany the model policy, which shall include a template for documentation of actions taken according to the policy to address an absence, which constitutes the truancy reporting protocol. And the model procedure shall also include a template for standard documentation. Then we go all the way to page 15, so no changes between page 7 and page 15. You decided to leave the hearings after enrollment language in for today and also add back in the home study program attendance requirements report that traveled over from the house.
That's in section 8 only,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
I only see that it has, that they're gonna do a report, but they're not gonna keep
the enrollment hearings, is that what you're referring to?
yes.
That's in section 7.
Is it?
It's a
Thank you.
standalone. I didn't change anything there.
All right, sorry, thank you.
And we had testimony from the agency to the effect that to do this, I have to fund it. And the agency was actually gonna, I don't know if by today, give us some sense of what we would need to add it for the.
I can't tell who you're looking at.
I'm
Me
sorry.
or- Okay.
Yeah, I think we are in the process of, if we haven't already, submitting some written testimony.
I did forward some
Yeah.
testimony and it's.
Yeah, I would actually request if we could have some brief testimony from our legal counsel to actually talk through this more deliberately rather than sort of this ad hoc sort of policy development that's been happening. I would request that we could get about 15 minutes to sort of walk through, rather than trying to do this on the fly, which is how policies have been developed thus far.
Here.
No, I'm requesting that you request testimony from us.
Okay. Do that, like
Appreciate it.
tomorrow.
We'll work on that. I will alert her right now.
Okay, and there was, talk yesterday about the School Boards Association request. For, about the, cost of health insurance. I talked to JFO. It would require JFO, number one, they thought the language was so unclear, they couldn't figure out what they were supposed to be doing. The other is that they, to the extent that it involved actuaries, they were gonna have to hire an actuary in their curbside estimate is in the $50,000 range. So I think it's not well enough baked to make it into this book. In my opinion.
So that you're looking at a home, we looked at a home here in 930.
No, I'm sorry. I'm mixing things. I confused you. And I understand how that, I'm talking about the provision that the School Boards Association asked us to put in about health insurance. I was jumping ahead from this.
Good.
So,
Do you want to save that conversation for then? Finish this or?
I thought I was finished because we were gonna wait.
Okay.
Well, you didn't
But
do that.
if there's
And
somebody,
locked you there.
if there's somebody has a question, she'll, yes, ask it.
I'll ask, so Jared. We hear what you're saying, but we also hear what the homeschoolers are saying, so want to try to get a balance in there for both of you, so, because I'm gonna fight on behalf of the homeschoolers. Do you believe there's a compromise in here somewhere?
Yeah, so can you clarify what is the goal for the homes from the testimony that you received? What do you perceive to be the goal that they're trying to achieve?
Is that they prove to you when they're under question, leave it open. When they come under question, that they have the right to have a hearing to prove what they're doing is right, not just be of the, have the agency of education go and do the same.
Okay, so they're looking for a due process
Yeah.
sort of outlined. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that we can definitely explore. I do think having that as the question, I'd like to come back around to our legal counsel, our general counsel,
That's
and
fine.
really identify what we can do, sort of
Okay.
what's already existing within statute. Are we solving a problem that we solve through process, or just doing the statutory change? So I think that's why it's important to actually have, and thank you, Chair, some testimony from the agency looking at what exists in statute and then what's proposed. And understanding the goals of the homeschool community is really helpful.
So the recommendation for the study come from the agency.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I'll share with you, I had already tasked my team internally with doing this study. So I was like, hey, you want to do something in this space? Why don't we do something comprehensive? And it was our recommendation that we do a study. Again, just as we've done with, special education, before we try to make big changes to the system, let's actually identify what the current system looks like.
So the study is underway with or without the legislation effectively.
Yeah.
So the question for us, and one that you want to offer some testimony has to do with enrollment after.
That's right.
Okay. Actually, after.
And I can clarify to Emily Simmons that that's sort of the stated goal there. And if the committee has a different stated goal, that would be really helpful as well.
Well, the stated goal, I think, is to bring back what we had in the past. Until it was.
I would indicate that what we've had in the past was not found to be workable. So what I would prefer is that we actually offer something that will work.
Fair
Yeah.
enough,
Okay, great.
fair enough. So we'll get you tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a little vague. What we had in the past, there were all kinds of nuances and procedures, like handing in work for evaluation. See it, just be a little thick. What we had in the past, we removed a lot. We removed maybe too much, right? Now we're trying to put it back in, not the full.
So we'll have you in tomorrow.
Sounds great.
Council. So, okay. So with regard to the request of the School Board Association, and I thought more was maybe going to be clearer on the available from JF.
I don't think you scheduled till 3:30.
Oh, okay. We're ahead of ourselves. Okay.
We're talking about the health insurance thing.
Yeah,
Is that? I mean,
we had a request to add.
what was that?
We had a request to add the language. But you were going to say,
Yeah, I mean, it seems. It doesn't quite seem like it's something that would be in this committee. I mean, it's a health insurance question and it's a finance question. I don't know what. I don't know what we're trying to do.
I'm with you. So, yes.
Okay, so why couldn't it be added to the bill and then forwarded to the respective committee on that for their analysis? Why does that have to be a standalone bill? And we all understand the problem is. There's been no activity to try to solve that particular problem, although we've known about it for years. Sure, the way the bill is formed. This one is that bill. We're worried about the way this one is that bill.
It's not really totally an ag problem. It's a system-wide, agency-wide problem. I see it.
I don't know. I
I
don't
don't
see
know
it
if
as,
education needs
I think
to
we're really opening up the aperture on this issue. I don't think it's that big.
Well, let's hang on. This part of the discussion we can come back to it when JFO arrives. But I'll let them speak for themselves. So actually, are we down to, let's just make sure we're clear about this. We're down to the one issue of how we treat the action after enrollment. And there's some testimony tomorrow from the agency's attorney. And we're down to whether we do or do not add something having to do with the request of the School Boards Association. Are we're down to those two things?
Yeah, but again, you're two different bills.
Yeah.
9:30.
Oh, right.
But you're mixing two.
Yeah, I am mixing. That's the thing. So on this one, we're down to a single issue, the absenteeism bill, absenteeism, down to the one issue that we'll hear about tomorrow. Okay.
And we have the performance contract. We could select. John, can we talk to you about that? I don't know where that landed.
That's in the, we're.
I didn't know, while we're talking about all of them, I just thought I'd mention it. Don't know where that landed.
I think,
Look at it.
yeah, look at. Okay, so we'll come back to this. And now we're switching to the miscellaneous bill.
Yes, and I see Nolan's here.
So. But again, on the miscellaneous bill, right?
Right.
Okay.
Do you want me to get up and have Nolan sit down or?
Well, you get to it, you,
There's nothing in the bill that is going to prompt you to talk about it.
okay, well, then we could do it since you're here. So, yeah, yes, let's do that.
Nope, I could use a water. Thank you.
So, for the record.
I know. For the record, Bill Langle, Drug This Club, is I have been in this room in 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah. For those of you, I've worked with all of you except for you.
Around it.
Yeah.
Great.
Members from Rutland, I've spent a lot of time with them.
Yes,
Okay.
just to reiterate where we are, we've now switched to the miscellaneous bill 931. And we're talking about the fact that we have the Western School Boards Association to add some language. Council St. James yesterday, we were talking about it, suggested that we have a staff of JFO, about the disability and what it would take involved in doing that. You and I talked last night. And so I guess put this, why don't you just sort of give us your JFO's
Sure.
response to both the feasibility and the expense of what would be involved.
Sure. I've looked through the language and I guess I can either walk through each piece, but I guess the first question when I read this is I'm trying to understand what it is that people really want to know. I look at this and I'm not sure it answers the questions you really want to know the answers to. So, for instance, I'll walk through, assess the financial ability of the ed fund and Vermont school districts to pay for current costs. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Where'd that come from? It's the language I saw from the advocates was one sentence.
Sure.
It's either you shift to we're all talking about the same topic and the same
I don't know
bill.
if we are.
We're talking about negotiations for healthcare.
So I'm talking to, I'll put it this way, I'll answer whatever questions you want. The only thing I've
So we need
seen,
to settle on what question, what it is you analyze to make sure it's.
I have
all
the
those two go.
proposal from the school boards. There's 3 bullets. One is about assessing financial ability, the other one's comparing healthcare costs, the other one's actuarial study. First thing I'll say is actuarial analysis costs money, lots of money. You're probably talking $50,000 to $100,000 depending on what it is you want done. The other thing I'll just sort of flag is that there's another similar but different study in S190 that looks at a public, sorry, go ahead,
My apologies, no, I'm gonna interrupt just for a second.
please.
We received a separate note today from School Boards Association that had only one request.
Okay.
Three requests was a day or two ago.
Sure.
They clearly realized that's not something.
Okay. Does anyone have a copy of it?
No, I don't know anything about
Mark,
this.
I did. Because I wasn't sure if you all got it directly, I forwarded to you directly.
Okay,
That was the,
what I'm reacting to and have been reacting to is what we were requesting to do yesterday.
Right.
3
Right.
bullets.
But yes, and that's what I was here to talk about. So why don't we finish that discussion actually?
Sure.
Because. Go ahead.
can I
Yes.
try to put us out of our misery here and actually answer Nolan's first question and be as impolitic as possible, but I think the debate that's being had in an uninformed way is there some outsized benefits that are falling onto the property tax in teacher healthcare that the states around us are not experiencing the same cost. And I think then the challenge becomes, are they more outsized than what the rest of Vermonters are experiencing, as we have a different system than other states? But are there things that we should be looking at that put our teachers in a category of their own for their healthcare benefits that then property taxpayers are struggling to afford?
Trying to think of how there's so many ways to come at this. First of all, every state is different, obviously. You know, we have a statewide property tax and we have a unified healthcare, the VI. There's two pieces. There's what are the cost of premiums? But then behind it is what are the underlying costs of healthcare in general? And I think in general, everybody struggling with healthcare costs in every state. Vermont is no different. You'll hear a lot of people say we have the highest premiums and whatever. I can't say that's true or not, other than the fact that we all know that healthcare costs is a huge driver for small businesses. We know it's a driver for healthcare costs for teachers, obviously, because the ed fund education cost, healthcare costs, or the education fund is clearly a pressure on the ed fund. I don't know that looking at other states solves the problem. I think the underlying problem is we need to solve healthcare costs in general. You know, we can play with premium levels and the types of plans and the richness of plans and HSAs and HRAs, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem of we need healthcare reform, that our costs of healthcare are just too high. So, and I don't want to weigh into whether benefits are too rich or not rich enough. I don't want to weigh into that. I don't want to get into the bargaining piece. I would just say that it's definitely a driver in the ed fund because education costs, healthcare costs are captured in the education fund. And unless we, tackle the underlying costs of healthcare, it's going to continue to be a problem, regardless of the richness of the benefits.
Can I ask one more question? So if we were to have this conversation with you in economic development, where we're talking about this other sentence that has come in and out of our inboxes that essentially says the mediator or the VLRB could go item by item and pick and choose what benefit level they would, instead of a last best offer. There's not a lot of precedent for that, I would imagine. Like, that's a big labor relations question, is if we let the VLRB decide individual line items of healthcare benefits.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Frank, I want to weigh into that. So I don't know that I can be helpful in that.
Okay, well, we should just continue with what is our arbiter here for this. I think we're ready to jettison the notion that we're gonna do this study.
Yeah.
Because it's not formed, it's not baked, and there's also no money to the actual portion into any of them.
Right.
So, any issue with that? Anybody? These are two. There's a get to your question. Just gets to this one. Then the next question is. So
My question isn't for JFO at all.
I know that. So that's why we're getting. That's what we're getting.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get
Sure, how we got all,
Well, because we were requested. This was the request from the committee. We have just arrived at the answer of not going to do it. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. To be here. That's all you got to say.
Is this what it's like to talk about healthcare all day?
Change of air.
Welcome to our committee. Now go home.
Okay, so we now have a request from several weeks to look at a different question, which is adding a sentence. You'll see that to us. Pretty well.
which is a derivative, I guess, of one of those three bullets. Which simply has to do with, with at the point of negotiation, that instead of the mediator being required to pick one best and last offer of alcohol or the other of alcohol that they can pick and choose issue by issue. It's a normal negotiation construct. It's the world I come from. No one ever comes to us and tells you only your side or your side will prevail. It's a mixture of the two. That's what the mediators do. It's their role. And to change that construct, that's what this is. It allows the mediator to pick from the two best and last offers elements that make a good compromise.
That is what they're original.
That's much, yeah. I don't know how we all spun off,
We spun off because they asked us to.
but we don't have to do everything they tell us to.
They
So that's what I was
came
going
in
to say.
yesterday with that request. We handled it.
Understood.
Okay. That does not conflict with this. So, why we would have to figure out who we'd have to have it for testimony on this. And let's hold that then for that purpose, for that discussion, and go through what we have to focus right now. That's it, so,
Longbush Bill.
9:31. On this way to this.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. You have draft 5.1 of your instances of amendment to H 931 is passed by the House. No change to the first instance of amendment, which is striking out the class size minimum clock starting language altogether. So you're just replacing it with deleted.
And just so people remember, that's going to now be added to the 955.
Yes.
Definitely did not remember to do that. So now I will make a note to do that. Thank you very much.
And that is that the clock is gonna start ticking for class sizes once.
The measure when it goes to.
There we go.
Yeah, that's what we will see in next time. And I hope that.
And then the second instance of amendments, I can already see I've made a mistake. It should be 4 new sections. It'd be sections 16, 18, and 16, 17, 18, and 19. So no change to section 16, which is the Intercollegiate Sexual Harm Prevention Council language. And then if you jump to section 17,
Just on 50.
there's that. And it is just the section heading is highlighted in yellow so that I didn't get anything. This is the amendment to section 570, which contains the hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention advisory council language. And so this amendment is only to subsection D on of this statute. And it essentially redoes the advisory council. So you can see all of the current membership struck. And you have starting on page 7, line 19. Going on to page 8, the membership of the advisory council. Do you want to go over each one of those, folks?
No.
Okay. And then I'll let the membership speak for themselves. I'm happy to walk through it if you want. On page 9, line 6, subdivision 2, the duties of the advisory council. They're required to meet at least 4, but not more than 12 times a year. They're required to review and coordinate school and statewide activities relating to the prevention of and response to harassment, hazing, and bullying. Required to review the model harassment, hazing, and bullying prevention policies developed by the secretary every 2 years, beginning in 2026, and recommend updates to the policy if necessary. Generate and distribute school professionals resources on hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention response. Manually solicit input from students, parents, and schools on hazing, harassment, and bullying. Give you guys a report every year. And then you all would be required to hold joint legislative hearings with your colleagues in the House to review the report. And the council is required to submit the report to the state board at the same time. members of the council are entitled to per diem, under current law for not more than 12 meetings a year from funds appropriated to the Agency of Education. And then no changes to subsection, what is now F, which is the definitions for the subchapter, but it has been redesignated because we've added a new subsection above it. Then section 18 is new, it's adding an appropriation from the general fund to ALE in fiscal year 27 for those per diem and reimbursement expenses. And then the effective date remains the same as passed by the House. But we just keep pushing it down in number, so it appears there is section 19 now.
Questions? Okay,
This is miscellaneous,
this is miscellaneous.
and we were gonna look at the contract, performance contract language.
Yeah, that somehow fell out. So
I think you had John in here, and that may just not have been communicated to me as the drafter. So you'd like to see that language in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As it was given to you, or did you make any
no changes.
Okay. Anything else you thought you would see in this draft that you didn't? Anything I missed?
No, what to do is we have to figure out this one remaining issue.
And I literally did take a walk and stretch my legs, so I didn't
Yeah,
hear.
yeah.
What is the remaining issue?
Whether to add something that goes to how negotiations are conducted for healthcare.
Okay.
And we are not doing the language that we discussed yesterday.
Okay,
to make that decision.
okay,
So that's how, but there is a close to 7 weeks to add a sentence, which do forward this, but this.
It did not, just to confirm. Okay,
I think this language has been, I'm guessing this is language that's been floating around for a while.
Well, it's a single sentence, so it's not the whole bill.
And I think you heard from my colleague Sophie Zadatny on this last year, right?
I don't recall.
I think she had a PowerPoint on the bargaining for healthcare and the last best offer. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah,
Last year.
yeah.
Okay. So perhaps we should, if we're going to go down this, we should have her in again. So that may want to talk about that afterwards, have a schedule. And then we'll need to figure out who else we would need to have a testify.
Could we like keep that separate from the rest of the bill?
Yeah, I
For
think,
now.
but let me just add this question, are we otherwise set with this bill?
But we agreed it, added the performance contract.
Yes, Jill.
Sorry.
You know, I got, okay.
I forgot to say it for the record. So for the record, Jill Briggs Campbell, Deputy Secretary of Education. I wanted to signal that the Agency of Education, along with BSA, BPA, and BSPA, continue to have some concerns about the expanded scope of work and duties for the HHB Advisory Council. I did have a moment to sidebar in the hallway with Gail from the Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence Prevention, and I'm hoping that maybe she and I have an opportunity to meet and maybe provide some amended language. Specifically, are two areas of concern which I'm hoping can be resolved is the duties under B and D. So B has the advisory council. And Legislative Council, if I can ask you to read the exact words. So I'm trying to do too many things at once.
The advisory council shall review and coordinate school and statewide activities relating to the prevention of and response to harassment, hazing, and bullying. Okay.
So it would be very unusual to ask an advisory council to be coordinating activities that are the responsibility of the Agency of Education under statute. So I think we have a conflation of roles and responsibilities here. Title 16 has very specific things that the Agency of Education is directed to do. this is actually having an advisory council doing those things. And then D,
Generate and distribute to school professionals resources on hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention and response.
so what I would recommend, since the Agency of Education is, you received testimony from Courtney O'Brien yesterday, we are already undertaking this as part of our responsibility under Title 16, is that instead you might amend it to be the advisory council will review materials that are produced by the Agency of Education as directed under blah, blah, blah. So what I'm suggesting here is that the advisory council in B and D is not acting as an advisory council. We don't normally have advisory councils implementing. So that was one item. I'm hoping that we can have some consensus on that. I've been in conversation with the other Bs. I did check with Colin and he said BTNA has no position on this, but that would be our recommendation. And then the other thing that we wanted to point out is your expanded membership would result in a 7-to-5 ratio with the majority of members of the advisory council not being education practitioners on what is a school HHB prevention advisory body. So we wanted to signal that that feels like a misalignment. We don't object to this additional membership, but the HHB council actually recently did a survey of what they would like to see in terms of more representation. And they were quite specific that they would like to see more educators on the council. So we would recommend actually the addition of an additional educator, potentially someone whose role is specifically social worker, counselor. We are, yeah, so I can't see if Gail's out.
Okay. Can you come with to us? With
I would love to.
suggested
Yeah,
language?
I actually think that we can come up with some compromise language, but I just wanted to signal I don't actually think that this is.
Okay,
As
that's fine.
as it should be. Okay, great.
So yeah, come
I've
to us
got it as a to do. We'll get back to you.
with that tomorrow as
Great.
well. And,
I'm forgetting the name of it, but there is an official like coalition of equity practitioners among our school districts. And I feel like that would be a good place to get that member. I can look up the name of it. And I do just want to say the Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network, one of the young women who started it, Addie Lensner, who's at Middlebury, just received the Truman Scholarship for Vermont. So just wanted to note that.
Yeah.
It's a very important public service award for us.
it's from my district. So. Okay, so you're on tomorrow.
We'll include this and we'll be very efficient tomorrow.
Okay, and we're getting there. Yes.
So we were told yesterday that it wouldn't be until July that your model policy would be out. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we always build our model policies working with advisory councils and the field. Yes. And we always try to do them with policy, procedure, templates, and tools all at the same time. This policy, again, is the high level. This is what the board shall do. Procedure is what the superintendents and the districts do. And then the guidance tools and templates is how you actually get it done. And we're also putting in significant realignment of resources to do really investing in training in the field so that we can actually start to move the needle on this.
So we'll work to get the agency in tomorrow, and then I'm thinking that on Friday we'll have the Words Association, NEA, whoever else wants to, and Sophie together on this issue. That this language I think it came from the School Boards Association, from the School Boards Association. And but we're not getting that tomorrow because we've got to run that 9:55. So we'll find out on Friday with us discussion. Otherwise, hopefully we can check by tomorrow and actually perhaps vote out the absenteeism bill. And we can be within a day of voting out the miscellaneous. It'll take a moment to see. We'll have every box checked except for the one. Okay. So people are on to, people want to break it.
Each
Keep going.
row, I don't.
Yeah.
I just wanna just.
So- So, we have a draft 955 1.1. And let me just set this up a little bit. I did it quickly yesterday. But we've been working on this issue for a year. And we had maps that we've been working on. And so what I did over the weekend is trying to use 955 as the framework as it came from the House. Is put 955 has CISAs, 7 CISAs, and then it has sort of preferred worker zones that is set up within those CISAs to facilitate the help about workers inspections. I took the map we had been working on with what we had sort of thought of as potential SUs. We're not doing SUs anymore per se, but I took our map and used that as a formative basis and left Chittenden County with the House and Addison, all those other districts, the gray area, the old gray area, the way that the House had left it. But with our SUs and made those the preferred merger areas and then redrew the seesaw boundaries slightly to fit around that concept. So that's what the map does. Beth, I did not ask Beth to spend time changing the towns listed in the draft scale for the House, because we do that, looking for that. So that could be a task that just takes more time than this time. So you have these materials, so it's built around this. And then though tried very hard to work with the House construct. And I think you'll see there's in some ways not a ton of changes.
Does anyone? Wait, is this a different thing? These two different things?
No, one is the one with 4 blocks on it, or is the those are the preferred areas, preferred merger areas when you're right there. Then that on top now is the seesaw boundaries. The seesaw boundaries fit over the preferred. Okay. So we have a new version. We've completed. I don't remember when we completed our walkthrough with that. We came up from the House a couple days ago.
Like last week,
We finished it last week.
9:55.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So that's right. Finished it on Thursday. And so new proposed version to start the discussion started here with the committee, taking what we've been working on all year and trying to put the two things together in a way that we hopefully make some sense to you. Yes.
So the interest I have when this comes up for changes is understanding how this relates to the CPE districts and ensuring that the CTE directors are required to be and permitted to be at the table from the beginning in
Within the season.
whichever congregation. Probably the CSIS, probably the CSIS, yes.
To figure out how that.
Okay.
So with that,
The St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. So I prepared 2 documents for you today, myself and John. The first is, it sounds like not what we're going to be using, and that is your actual amendment to H 955. H 955 is passed by the House with 144 pages, and the changes in this first draft were minimal enough that I recommend going with instances. That can be hard to put in context. So I don't know what else to call this, a dummy document, a working document, whatever we want to call it, which is H 955 as passed by the House with your instances kind of inserted in as if it was a strike all. But it has not been formatted as an amendment. So there's no lead-in language that says you have possession of the bill and you're making this proposal to the House. It just says that it's H955. And so I just want to be clear to this committee and anyone watching that the 144 page document I developed as more of a tool or a tool and is not formatted to be your amendment.
We do have that, but it's also
Yeah.
part of all of this in this version. So we talked, Beth and I talked about doing this, and you can calling it a dummy document is fine. We will, but the thinking is that in the end, we'll do it with instances of amendment, which we also have. But for today, let's use this.
Okay. So changes between, and when we say this, we're talking about the 144 page document. That says draft 1.1 on it. Changes between the House passed version are highlighted in yellow. And I am going to, off to the side, use the instances to kind of call out. I mean, obviously we can use the highlighting to call it out, but I'd like to call out the actual instances. So the first instance of amendment is to section 1, and it's the language change you see on lines 6 and 7. So to ensure each student is provided substantially equal opportunities for an excellent education. The House Pass version says educational opportunities that will prepare the student to thrive. And you're changing that to equal opportunities for an excellent education that will prepare the student to thrive.
So just a quick explanation. It's said in the past, it's simply just talking about equal opportunity. That can be at any level, and it doesn't imply, I wanted us to be talking about excellence. People have made the comment that what the work we're doing doesn't, I don't agree with it, but that it doesn't really go to education per se. And I wanted to make sure that make clear that we're seeking an excellent education.
And also as opposed to an adequate education,
As
which
opposed to an
usually comes up at
Not
the,
talking about constitutional language here, we're just talking about an hour and 10. An hour and 10 is excellence. I assume that's yours.
So the next change, you have to scroll all the way to school. You have to flip your pages. I have to scroll. Piece of membership.
While we're doing that, let me just
Okay.
say, just to reiterate, we talked about this, but we are not touching purview sections, so-called purview sections of the bill, which are the purview of the finance committee. We have the first 29 sections, and then we have some at the end. So
Here's a great example of how awful I am at highlighting the language that I've changed. Page 11, the second instance of amendment. It's actually on page 11, lines 8 through 10. So the House passed version, subdivision 4, were in their bylaws, what's required to be in the bylaws. And so subdivision 4 is passed by the House reads the financial terms and conditions of membership of the CISA, including any applicable membership fee. And your second instance of amendment will be adding the rest of that subdivision. So both of which shall be allocated to the amount of services actually provided to each member supervisory union.
probably just make clear the intent.
what, but I'm not clear what it is.
Yeah, so this is the hard part for me. Woe is me, my tiny little violin. Of trying to do the instances and create this document. So it should read both of which shall be allocated according to the amount of services actually provided to each member supervisory union. So your membership, so this is trying to get at that membership fees and the fees for services will be allocated according to the amount of services actually provided to each member SU.
Membership fees and the fees for services.
Mhm. The third instance of amendment is adding a brand new section to chapter 10 and title 16, which is your seesaw chapter. So if you go to page 19, line 3, this is all brand new language from the house compared to what the house had. This language is essentially the language that you had in the language that you have been working on all session related to supervisory union boundary adjustment requests. I have not spent a terrible amount of time thinking through whether this works. I think it's a little clunky. But I have changed that language that you all had been working on to make it applicable to seesaw membership. So the tricky thing about the state assigning supervisory unions to a seesaw is that you are doing that through law, and only you can change the law. So you can't, school districts or supervisory unions could not get together and decide, I should really be a member of that seesaw and just make it happen. Because seesaw membership is in statute. And the field cannot change statute. It's the exact same concept of charter change proposals.
So Cheryl talked about being able to move, if you're in the wrong, being able to move, we just want to have a process for that to happen. It is clunky by almost by definition because it has to happen through a legislative process. But we want to at least set up the process, just like you have other deputies. Yeah, Senator Shinn.
So under the House version, there's no circumstance in which an SU can go to another season.
There's no circumstance where they could do that on their own without an act of the General Assembly, just by virtue of the fact that their membership is in law.
Right. And this clarifies how, well, okay, so that's how it would be regardless of whether we put this in here, but this section 608 creates the guidelines as to how we would go about the process of moving them to another season.
It goes about the process it's the process by which a supervisory union could request for you. So this is all based on, just like when we walked through it for supervisory unions, this is all based on the charter change provisions in Title 24. And so it requires certain like public hearings and votes, etc., before a charter change even makes it to the legislature. And then the legislature takes it up as they would any other bill. It's a policy choice of whether or not you want to have that process or whether you want to just allow folks to email you like they do now and say, we'd like this changed, right? It is completely a policy choice on whether you build a process that has to be followed or you organically let folks approach you like you do for every other word in the Green Books, right? There's not a process to change every other word in the Green Books, right? You get requests from the administration, from the judiciary, from advocacy groups, from your constituents to change the law. That could also work for changing seesaw membership. Or you can build a process, hoops that folks have to jump through before their request can even be taken up by you. And that's what this does. This says before the legislature is even going to consider changing membership, you have to go through this process. If you didn't build in this process, like the House didn't build in this process, and someone were to ask me, well, how would seesaw membership change? It would take an act of the General Assembly that would have to become law. So whether that's the governor signs it or the governor, you override a veto, or the governor allows it to become law without his signature or her signature or their signature. But how the idea to change that membership could come to you in any way, shape, or form. This is saying the only way we're gonna take action if you follow this process.
Thank you.
My sense is for what's, it's, this would legitimize the process by the time something gets to the legislature, would legitimize it.
So, like I said, it's a little clunky because the process that we built for supervisory unions was on the school district level, and school districts have an electorate that is specific to them. And now membership is at the supervisory union level. And so it's a little clunky. So if you decide that this is an avenue you want to pursue, we may want to refine it a little bit, or maybe you're happy with it. I don't know. Let's walk through it. So on page 19, line 3, the board of a member supervisory union may propose to the General Assembly to adjust the membership of the seesaw it belongs to in accordance with the following procedure. A proposal to adjust seesaw membership may be made by a member SU board, or, and this is where I kind of had to wing it, by petition of 5% of the aggregate voters of the supervisory union's member school districts. So for a charter change, it's 5% of the voters of the municipality. And so for the supervisory union boundary adjustment, I just made it 5% of the school district voters. The supervisory union doesn't have an electorate. Each of its member school districts has an electorate. So I think this is a policy choice here of whether you want it to be you want to trigger this process by a petition of the voters, and if so, what is that threshold percentage, and what is the threshold percentage of? I've tried to make it analogous to what you were working with and say it's the aggregate voters of the SU member school districts. So without any further language, that could be, one school district. Like those votes could come from one school district. It doesn't say anything in here about having to come from 5% of, you could say 5% of each of the member school districts to trigger all policy. An official copy of the seesaw membership adjustment proposal shall be filed as a public record with the clerk of, and there's an errant, each of the applicable supervisory unions member school districts at least 10 days before the first public hearing regarding the membership adjustment proposal. School district clerk shall certify the date on which the clerk received the official copy, and the date copies will be made available to members of the public upon request. The member SU board will hold at least 2 public hearings prior to the vote on the membership adjustment proposal. The first public hearing shall be held in accordance with subdivision 82 of this section at least 30 days before the vote. And if the membership adjustment proposal is made by a member SU board, the board may revise the proposal as a result of suggestions and recommendations at a public hearing. But in no event shall such revisions be made less than 20 days before the date of the meeting to vote on the membership adjustment proposal. If revisions are made, the supervisory union board has to post notice of those revisions in the same place as the warning for the meeting, not less than 20 days before the date of the meeting. It is required to attach such revisions to the official copy of the request kept on file for public inspection in the office of the clerk of each of the supervisory union's member school districts. If the membership, and the membership is spelled wrong there, if the membership adjustment proposal is made by petition, the second public hearing shall be held not later than 10 days after the first public hearing. And the SU board shall not have the authority to revise the membership adjustment proposal made by petition. After the warning and hearing requirements of this section are satisfied, the membership adjustment proposal shall be submitted to the voters of each of the applicable supervisory unions member school districts at the next annual meeting, primary election or general election in the form in which it was filed, except that the SU board may make technical corrections. On page 21. Notice of each public hearing and of the annual or special meeting shall be given in accordance with current law. Each notice shall specify the seesaw membership to be adjusted, setting out the new proposed membership in the amended form with deleted matter struck through and new matter underlined. And if the SU board determines that the membership adjustment proposal is too long or unwieldy to set out in an amended form, the notice shall include a concise summary of the membership adjustment proposal and shall state that an official copy is available for inspection in the office of the clerk of each of the member school districts.
But maybe walk through this in other bill or places and speak to the mission.
I mean, this is your call. I think it's really a different.
Okay.
I think it is materially different
Okay.
because of the different
Get going.
levels
Okay.
of membership here. Voting on a membership adjustment proposal shall be by Australian ballot. I've added that ballots shall be commingled, and I think maybe you want to think about adding a provision that the vote needs to take place on the same day in each of the different school districts, similar to voting for formation of a union school district.
It seems almost obvious that I'll say others need to do that. So yeah, let's add that.
And then the ballots shall be commingled is technically a policy choice. I put that in there based on how union school districts are handled. Okay. And then the ballot has to show the membership adjustments. I'll try and keep going.
It's okay.
Let's see. So if we go, so then the vote happens, page 22, subsection B, the clerk of each of the applicable supervisory unions member school districts shall announce and post the results of the vote immediately after the vote is counted. And the clerk of each of the applicable supervisory unions districts within 10 days shall certify the results to the Secretary of State. And then this is about like the information that needs to go to the Secretary of State's office. So whether it was a board proposal or an electorate proposal, copy of the certified copy, a copy of the official certified copy of the membership adjustment proposal filed with each of the clerks, copies of the warnings and notices, minutes of the meetings, copies of warnings and notices, a copy of the ballot and the results of the advisory supervisory union board votes that we're about to get to. If the voters do not approve the membership adjustment proposal, no further action shall be taken unless and until a new membership adjustment proposal is initiated pursuant to this section. So CSAW membership is at the SU level. The SU has no inherent electorate. So if you want voters to be voting on whether or not a supervisory union can request for you all to reassign them to a CSAW, the electorate is the electorate of the school districts that make up the supervisory union. And so if you're commingling ballots, you have no way of knowing which school district voted for what. So it's just a majority. So if the aggregate of the votes is no, then the process stops. And technically, you should not be adjusting those membership boundaries. If someone were to email you on the side, right? Like if it technically. If the voters do vote and say, yes, we do want this membership adjustment, then the boards of the supervisory unions affected by the membership adjustment have to hold an advisory vote to approve the membership adjustment proposal within 45 days after the results of the school district votes. And so under the supervisory union boundary adjustment construct, this was really only going to be 2 supervisory unions that were affected. The way I read this language now, it would be every affected supervisory union. So it would probably be all of the supervisory unions on the old CSAW and all of the supervisory unions on the new CSAW. Their boards would have to hold an advisory vote of whether they think this membership change is a good idea.
This might be a comment, maybe a question for you, Chair, but seems like a lot, seems excessive. You expand, can you just describe a bit more on what this is, meant to do?
You mean this section?
Yeah, this particular, what was just, seems like it must.
Only to give
Thank you.
information to the legislature as to whether, like the new seesaw, the one they're trying to move to wants them. So we have the voters saying they'd like to go over there. And then another piece of information would be, do they want them? And rather than have that be a major vote of the everybody in that seaside, it would just be the boards saying, yeah, we do an advisory basis. We want them, or actually we don't want them. And the theory is the legislature would want to know that.
So the first vote is the first CISA and an SU saying we want to leave.
No, it's the people within the SU that want to leave,
Okay.
wants to vote.
So the SU votes first. And then their CISA votes second, and then next CISA votes third.
I mean,
So it's not the CISA, and then, again, this is all policy. Like if there's anything,
SUs.
it's the way this has been drafted based on what I have to work with right now is it's the SU's boards making these votes. The CISA boards themselves are not actually involved in this process at all.
So the CISA or the SU that wants to leave does not vote. It's just the SU, and then then the prospective CISA votes as to whether or not they're going to accept.
Right, but so if you have CISA, the A through B, CISA 1 is made up of supervisory unions A through B. And then CISA 2 is made up of supervisory unions, whatever, right? There's 5 and 5, 10 supervisory unions. The way,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
So it's the SUs then.
Yeah.
This prospective CISAs that vote as to whether or not to allow the new
The
SU.
membership change.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, if you want to continue with this kind of charter change process, you can require anything you want in here. It could be the boards of the CISAs take an advisory vote, not the supervisory union boards. I think you have room to play here. And you don't have to have an advisory vote at all. I don't believe there's an advisory vote. Actually, I don't know. I don't want to speak to the charter change process.
Yeah, I don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to fully understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really just trying to give in whatever form the legislative information that would make that one decision. So I'm going to see some board level. So anyway,
So if the voters have voted, yes, we want this membership change. And after confirming that the clerks have certified all of the list of things that they're supposed to do to the Secretary of State's office, then the Secretary of State files the certificate and delivers copies of it to the Agency of Education, the State Board of Education, the Clerk of the House, Secretary of the Senate, and the chairs of the committees concerned with CISA membership of both houses of the General Assembly. And that is taken from the charter change process. So I don't think you need to have all of those folks involved here, right? Like this is really whatever process you want it to be.
so where were you? Which folks could we potentially eliminate?
Whoever you want,
This
literally whoever you want.
much age.
Oh, page 24, line 9. Obviously, the Agency of Education, the State Board of Education are not involved in the charter change process. I added them, but the clerk, the secretary, and the chairs of the committees that's language out of the charter change process.
So this is just who gets the.
Yep.
Okay.
And then it simply ends by saying the membership adjustment proposal should become effective upon affirmative enactment of proposal either as proposed or as amended by the General Assembly, which is language directly from the charter change process.
Senator Sheehan, offensive.
I'm not offensive, but I mean, there's a part of me that wants to say if you've got SU affirmatively voting to leave a CISA, and then you got the second group of SUs or the CISA board, whatever it ends up being, voting to accept the prospective SU into the new CISA. It seems unnecessary to have the General Assembly saying yes or no to something that's gone through two separate votes, two different regions. But I don't know, it seems maybe a little top heavy, but
The problem is that we're setting the boundaries legislatively. They have to get economic adjustment place.
I mean, what's to prohibit us from saying if there is a vote between one SU and the other SUs, it doesn't need to be legislated.
I can give this some further thought. But I think instead of thinking about the substance of the statute, just thinking about it as a statute is most helpful. There's nowhere else that you can just say, if you guys get together out in the fields and you agree to this legal change, the change has happened.
Right, because it's affecting the statute.
Exactly.
There it is.
Which is why the process to get to you can be whatever you want it to be. A specific process, no process, the way, like, there's no process to change the vast majority of the laws in the green books. But, I mean, I suppose you could come up with a process that allows for that membership to change, but then your statutes are always going to be out of date. And what good does that do anyone?
I get it. Thank you.
Senator, what should do that question?
I'm just thinking about, my musical chairs analogy. Because it's already agreed upon. I think a lot of people have been talking about the diversion voluntarily. Then they go through this process and then somebody gets left out. That's my concern. Especially if the long runs are already drawn. I mean, that should be, in my estimation, the living document. The boundaries, originally, we have to have boundaries. Right. They can get adjusted after. So possible.
I think you're thinking about districts and making sure we don't have to work in districts, right? That's something we have to pay attention to, but that's not quite what's going on here. Okay, yeah,
I'm just thinking that.
yes, okay, that's okay. We have to pay attention to living districts.
Do you want to keep talking about this or move on?
No, so the question for the committee is, we could do nothing. We could simply say that the SU that wants to succeed votes. That's it. And then we get that information and go forward. Or the added layer here is that CISA's vote about whether they want to go or whether they want to take it out. So that's the. I don't have strong feelings. I just asked Beth to use the same process that we used with SUs before. So there is some mechanism for it.
And should they be conjoined? That you can't have somebody that's dead center of one of these decide they want to have a different season. Doesn't matter.
Well, one session we decide. We look at that and go, that's not a good idea. Way over there. One session to do it, I guess.
I need to picture this.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at both the maps.
I think you only need one map. For
Okay.
this
It's the CISA
exercise.
map.
Yeah.
So
We're just talking CISAs right now. That's all.
it's not asking them to do both at the same time.
What we just, H 955 as amended by the House and as your amendment would have it,
I told her to go back up
does two things.
here. She probably.
It does many things, but for the purposes of this conversation, it does two things. It
Yeah.
creates seesaws in law.
I told her.
It assigns every supervisory union in the state to a seesaw. And so they have to do the work to stand those up. And it asks every school district in the state to come to the table to a study committee to discuss whether or not to form a unified union school district. This charter change process, this membership change process, would be an in perpetuity situation. So 10 years from now, when someone wants to change membership, or 1 year from now, when someone wants to change membership, if you were to go ahead with this concept, they would have to follow this process.
For an SU.
For CSUN membership to change, and membership is at the SU level, so it would be, yes, the SU changing CSUN.
So why don't we just note that we have to, the question is, do we want it to be as detailed as this? Or do we want to figure out a way to do it more simply to get to, or, but let's stick it in there.
More streamlined.
So then we're still on page 24.
Yes, we're on page 24. We're adding a new section. This is new from was not included in the House bill. This is a new section that you would be adding in your fourth instance of amendment. And the section 2A and right below it is 2B. And they really don't mean much without their effective dates. So section 2A takes the changes made in 955 to the powers of seesaws that we went over in my little chart. And I think Senator Weeks asked the question of what's current law and what was added by the House. And that was that current law on line 18 just says seesaws shall have the power to provide yada, 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 that best serve the needs of its members, period. And then the House added, including professional development, et cetera. And so section 2A will take effect on July 1, 2027. And the effect of this section is that on July 1, 2027, the language on lines 21 and 1 of page 24 and 25, which as in 955 are just examples of some of the services that could be offered, are now added to the list of the services that have to be offered on page 25, lines 11 through 13. And that change would not take effect until July 1, 2027. And then 2B is amending the same section of law. This section would not take effect until July 1, 29. Oh, and I can see I've already made a mistake there. I need to remove some language there. Pay no attention to lines 18 through 19. If you go to page 26, line 2, at a minimum, a seesaw shall, instead of offer, provide services in the following areas to its members, who shall be required to avail themselves of such services. So it goes from 955 saying you have to offer a couple of these, but no one has to use these services, to in 2007, you have to offer all these services. To 2009, not only do you have to offer all these services, your members actually have to use them.
Because we're trying to save money here, and this is the vehicle for doing it. And this is going to mean that the seesaws are going to be paid for saving money, or anything for saving money. Right. We should be in.
To that, I'm thinking about some of the testimony we had earlier. And thinking about, if you have these different SUs coming together saying, I need a contract for transportation. You also need a contract, and this other SU also needs a contract. Let's split the cost. That makes sense, but I think there could also arise scenarios where they may come together and say, all three of us need contracts for professional development, but we've got our transportation pretty squared away and it's a cost-effective situation. So we don't need to share that contract. But, so I worry about compelling the participation of these different services if it's not necessarily cost-effective or not necessarily
Yes.
in the interest of the students or the teachers. I don't know how to thread that deep. It's just concerning.
Put a next item, put a note next to the section. May not be a good idea. Let's just run it on to try to make it as.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to put a little more teeth into the CSIS, but I also want to make sure.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm making an assumption here, thinking ahead again, but, all these school districts have got contracts. And at some point, somebody's gonna have to find out which ones have to be ceased. We're gonna save some money by that, possibly, but I just want to think, I don't think I'm making an assumption it's not addressed.
Yeah.
That's a whole different dynamic.
It's irrelevant though. So there's one more thing that I was thinking about here. I'm not saying it because I think it's well taken consideration. Was trying to do was get to the point that these services are provided at this level and the superintendent becomes really the educational leader and develops curriculum and otherwise doesn't have to deal with all of this crap that we get involved with. That's kind of what I was thinking about. Yes.
So I hear what you say, but on both lists, line 5 is curriculum development, coordination and development, which leads to superintendent doing what?
I think this, so I'm sorry, fair point, fair question. But at the end, my mind anyway, is that the superintendent would still be responsible for curriculum. So there's a little bit of a conflicting thing there.
Well, they're responsible for implementation.
Implementation, maybe
Can I,
yeah, fair enough, actually. Maybe that's what but anyway.
I'd like to consider having the list represent facilities master planning somehow, and I don't really see it.
See some of the SDs focus on facilities.
Well, they,
Agree.
we have PCB testing we want to do and we want facilities master planning to happen. That's expensive. It's better done in regional coordination. There's nothing I remember from the chart that said the CSIS can't do correct facilities master planning.
I can note it right
But
here.
that's when you do hire experts like architects, engineers, building health scientists or something,
Not just master planning, but regional master. That's the real nuance here. That's really the target we're going to lead.
It could be. I mean, you still might want them to help streamline costs of local facilities decisions. It could be. I'm not good at semantics, like past a certain hour, and whether or not that's what we are doing.
Portion.
So I'm open to either construct, but I just want to see facilities master planning stuff.
Yeah. And I think Center Weeks is onto something too here
Mhm.
at the same time with thinking regionally about that.
Yeah.
Regional master plan, actually like regional facility planning, regional, something like that. I don't know.
I want
But,
facilities
yeah,
to be in there.
okay. Let's just make our notes. Yes,
If I could get a clarification for that, and I know you said it, but I missed it. So in 604, the due date, and I tried to find it, I couldn't find the due date for that section, goes into effect when?
So, section 2A on page 24, line 16 would be effective July 1, 27. And section 2B on page 25, line 14 would be effective July 1, 29.
shifting from offer to provide.
And then we are going to jump all the way, section 13, which is on page 34. This is the Union School District Creation, Consultation, and Facilitation section. This is the section that talks about the study committees and what they need to do. And so this fifth instance of amendment occurs on page 35, line 7. This is some of the criteria that the facilitators are required to use when they're grouping school districts. The House passed version had the total ADM of the school districts forming a study committee at 2,000, and our fifth instance of amendment changes it to 1,000.
So circle that, that's an arbitrary thought. I just wanted to raise that issue, and thinking about size of districts, and I don't know what the right number is, but I'm also thinking about rural areas and wanting to not be, we're not forcing anything, so on one hand, the other hand. So the question is, what's the right number of students for one for the study committee? And the House has 2,000. I just threw in 1,000 to.
I am losing track of where they form these. This is a CISA study committee?
No, yeah, he's on that.
Yeah,
There's nothing voluntary about this.
okay,
This
yeah,
is a guide for the facilitators
okay.
to use when they are grouping school districts together to form study committees. But it's just a guide.
And this is a guide to the number of 1,000 or 2,000.
Well, no, not necessarily. Go ahead.
Maybe, yes.
Within each of those zones on that, there'll be multiple study committees, presumably, depending on how many students are in each of those zones. So the question is, like, pick one of those zones and then group or whatever. Do we want to have the study committees focused on 1,000 students or 2,000 students, or how many? There would therefore be either 2, 3, 4 study committees in each of those zones, depending on the number of students we look at. Yes.
So,
Spot the house.
so these are the union school districts.
No, these are school districts. These are and I actually just saw these maps for the first time today. So I'm making assumptions based on my work with the House that every one of these squares is a municipality in Vermont. And some of those squares are already grouped together to form school districts. And some of them are standalone school districts because they are town school districts, city school districts, incorporated school districts. The colors represent the area, the geographic area within which a facilitator should be taking school districts and putting them on a study committee or study committees. So each one of these different colors is going to have a different number of school districts in it. And then within those, so let's say that there's 3 school districts represented in this blue, this aqua up here. Then the facilitator really doesn't have much to work with there, right? There's 3 school districts. There's probably going to be a study committee with all 3 of those school districts.
And they go outside the bounds of the colored area.
They're in the House language, which you have not changed. The facilitator is allowed to make adjustments. And these are just guidelines to start with.
Okay.
The facilitator is not required to stay within those colored areas, but is required to give a rationale for why they went outside the colored areas they did.
Thank you.
The sixth instance of amendment on line 9, the House had that the facilitator needs to group school districts together according to, or that the school districts needed to be contiguous when they were grouped together. And you have replaced that with school districts need to have the same operating structure.
I just want to, when we put a pin in the 1,000 versus 2,000, the mean school district size in the country is 1,500. So I'm not just saying that arbitrarily split the difference. 1,500 is a pretty average size for a rural community to get some scale. And then, of course, it still says we're practical, which I think would, so I'm just gonna put out that I think 1,500 is wrong.
Okay.
Do you want to keep going? Okay. So the seventh instance of amendment, we're staying in section 13. We're gonna stay on page 35. We're gonna go to subdivision 3 on line 16. Subdivision 3 requires the study committees to follow current law, chapter 11, union school district formation. And then everything under subdivision 3, all of the letters A through, I think, E, are some slight changes or some augmentation to what's required under chapter 11. And so this first section, we've struck what the House had in here, and we've replaced it with a study committee formed pursuant to this section to only identify school districts with the same operating structure as necessary, and shall identify a school district with an operating structure that differs from the majority of study committee members as advisable, as those terms are just are used in current law. So necessary means that the union school district can only form if those school districts all agree that they want to be part of the new school district. And advisable means it would be really cool if you joined us, but we're going to form regardless of whether or not you decide to join us. And then on page 36, continuing with that new language, nothing in this act shall be construed to compel the merger of school districts with dissimilar operating structures. And then the rest of line 2 through 6 is the same as the House offered. The eighth instance of amendment, we're going to go to, we're adding a new section. So we're going to skip all the way to page 44.
Before we get there, just to note this for anybody watching, and on starting on page 40, the guidance for study committee groupings, everything listed is not. That's the whole House bill as well. We just haven't spent the time on page. So now on to page 44.
Page 44, we're adding a new section here to require some interim reports. You're getting a report, the House version, and you've kept it, requires a report back to you all in January or February of next year with updates around statuses of study committees. And then the House version has a final report coming to you in January 1, 2029. And so section 14A basically adds some interim reports. So in January 28, the lead facilitators are required to submit a written report to you all with an update on the status of each study committee, including membership and the final recommendation of each study committee. Their final reports are due December 1, 2027. So the facilitator should know whether the study committees are recommending formation of a new union school district or not recommending it by January 28th. And then on page 45, subsection B, another interim report for the agency in consultation with study committees and the state board to submit a written interim report to you all with preliminary recommendations for SU boundary adjustments and seesaw boundary adjustments that take into account the final recommendations of the study committee formed pursuant to this act. So the final report asks for those final recommendations for whether there needs to be any SU boundary adjustments or seesaw membership adjustments. And this is asking for kind of a preliminary report based solely on the recommendations of the study committees. The new union school districts don't form unless the voters agree to it.
So this would be potentially in a quicker, easier way to adjust boundaries of the seesaws.
In the medium,
In the medium term.
in the, yes, in this moment in time.
Yeah.
If you envision seesaws as a long-term, then this moment of time is going to pass,
Yeah.
and you may still have the occasion where folks want to change membership.
Okay.
But yes. The next instance of amendment, we're gonna jump to section 24.
But before you
Yep.
move on, actually, it goes back a little bit to different pages, but when the facilitator was working with a group of districts about merger, and the facilitator or the people working COVID across CISA lines.
Yeah.
Okay. And thus this language,
I'm sorry,
this language perhaps about the seesaw adjustment.
yes,
Yeah, okay,
yes,
got it. Okay, yes. So
Just for clarification, the top of page 45, looks like AOE, State Board of Education, and the study committees form are all trying to answer the same question. What's the appropriate boundaries for both SUs and CSOs? Correct?
it's the agency's report, and they're required to consult with the study committee, yeah.
Right, very good. Thank you.
Okay, so we are gonna jump to sections 24 and 24A on page 61. These were the sections regarding the prohibition on charging fees beyond tuition. And your ninth instance of amendment strikes both of these sections and just deletes them, doesn't replace them with any new language other than the deleted signification.
So just note for people remember these sections. This was added in Ways and Means with zero testimony. And we got the one letter from the principal in Crestburg to the effect that if this language is going to effect, there'll never be another French trip.
Another what?
Or French trip or any trip.
Oh, trick, right.
Yeah, because there's no ability to charge fees, and so it would never happen. So it was zero testimony, not even remotely paid. So it's not necessary, this bill, no testimony given.
Second, oh. Wait a minute. That might. The 10th instance of amendment is to section 27, which is on page 65.
Sorry, before we jump, I'd like to go back to 24. So that removes both the tuition and the fee piece, right? So not just the fees.
Yeah.
So I thought we were moving to a system in which approved independent schools will be charging the same tuition or receiving the same tuition equivalent to the foundation formula. And
Living
not
within the
necessarily-
foundation formula.
Yeah, with it, yeah, same. And so I get the fees aspect. But I think if we undo that tuition piece, that's a pretty big.
It's not undoing, it would just revert to what was in Act 73, under which is, I recall, everybody gets the same. But the fees part, the tuition fee, there was no testing for this, so it's actually complicated as well, saying. Yeah. Whole thing is mixed together, the fees and tuition, and it's not made.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm seeing the next piece on line 17 and 18 of as passed by the House, that the tuition pieces that they are prohibited from requiring tuition above the amount of tuition paid by a sending school district pursuant to section 823, which is the foundation formula.
Yeah, right now, there's no high school rate. And so, well, if we want to get some testimony, we can, but there hasn't been any testimony in this section.
Okay, I would,
It's because I think without this section, that the same remains true that under Act 73, school district. Is it silent on that issue?
The tuition section, both under current law and Act 73, is just about money changing hands between the school district and the receiving school, sending district, and nothing about what could be required by the students or their families themselves.
I did think our intent was to ensure they are living within the same
Yeah, that's what,
foundation formula
I think that,
and not charging a family more money. I think we need to, that's the whole point.
but that's, yeah, I think it's,
Or school district.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I think, like I said, talked about the principals, there's
Right.
issues here because of
Yeah.
both the independent school and the public schools.
right.
It's more complicated than this, but that's stick a pin in it.
And I will say, I even have this conversation in my district. When my husband says we went to Greece and you had to pay to go or whatever, any school should be finding a way for students who can't afford that to go for free.
And they do.
There should be no like, nothing about we're not going to Friends anymore because we can't charge. You are still providing a public education. And if you have that trip available, you should be figuring out how all the kids can go who take French class.
I think they do.
Right, so, but I don't wanna let that go, that like, I don't want them to be able to charge fees either as a required, as a requirement for students to be able to participate in something.
So this is a sea change from the way that these things happen.
Yeah,
And if we want to really delve into it,
yeah,
we can, or we can just leave. Accept that it was thrown in without any testimony. And
no, like if anything, I would speed up the foundation formula, and I would speed up this, no money on top of the foundation formula. So it has to happen at least at the same time as the foundation formula.
well, okay, look, you got some testimony.
Okay.
10th instance of amendment is to section 27 on line 14, page 65. It strikes this entire section 27 and replaces it with a new section 27, but the only changes between the House version and your version are highlighted in yellow. There were just enough smatterings of them that it was easier to strike the entire section rather than do several instances of amendment. So this section requires the agency to update the district quality standard rules to establish criteria for inter-district budgeting. And we've added a modifier here that inter-district budgeting is for under the foundation formula. And that those rules need to be developed on or before December 31st, 2028. The House version had that as March 31st of 27. And then the criteria is required to provide guidelines for inter-district budgeting that affords Vermont's children opportunities and excellent education that are substantially equal in quality. Your 11th instance of amendment is to section 29A, which is on page 73.
Did you do the page 71 to have great size?
That's John.
Oh, okay,
It's coming up.
yeah, okay.
I'm going in order of the instances of amendments, so John will jump back in. This is my last one. Section 29A, in the House Pass version was, oh, sorry. Yeah, 29A in the House Pass version was the, definitions, the amendment to 16 VSA section 11, which added several definitions to your master definition list, 2016. And this amendment just deletes that section.
That's, but it's under current regulations for, yeah, this was. I didn't see this 29, what's that?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was on the wrong page.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
And then I think I'm gonna turn it over to John now.
So people know, this is work underway right now with the state board. We assigned this task with the state board last year. And this just sort of short circuits the work of the state board and. Yeah, that, but it is. Okay.
Right, meeting, Susie, the.
You want the trash?
I'll get it. I'll go over there. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm gonna let John.
Yeah. John Gray. Council. I should be pretty quick, a few sections here. You were in the, I do want to try to track you guys' preference with documents. So I had the sense that you were working off of a large compiled doc. We can keep doing that. The easiest way for me to jump around is to look at the instances of amendment, call out the section, and then I can jump to the big doc and tell you what page that's on, if that works. I'm happy to screen share if you would like, but I know that Beth was not, so I don't know what your preference is.
You don't have too many, so.
Okay.
So,
I had, starting with the 12th instance of amendment, that's section 29, which is on page 71 of the compiled doc, I believe. And just to frame what's happening here, this is an amendment to the small schools, smart schools support grants. You recall that these were set out in Act 73, and they are contingently effective like the remainder of the foundation formula. This is not a proposal that touches the dollars that flow. It is a technical piece related to what's the numerical threshold that kicks a school into being a small school. That's all that this is about. So you will know that a small school definition requires two prongs. One is an objective numerical assessment. Under Act 73, it's fewer than 100 pupils in the school. And then there's an additional discretionary check. You need to ensure that they're small by necessity. So two-pronged check, but the first of these is basically a numerical check. The chair raised the possibility that this 100 pupils per school may not adequately account for the variations in what schools are covering, right? They might have different grade coverage. So if you just made it based on size of, number of pupils in the school, but that school only covered 2 grades, maybe that means something quite different in a school that offers different grades. So this is a proposal to change that numerical check to be about grade size rather than about total school population.
but I think I tell you that I'm thinking about Enid in particular, has maybe 130 kids or something across kindergarten through 12, and yet they wouldn't qualify for this because they have more than 100 students. It really doesn't make any sense. And you have, by contrast, an elementary school that's K through 3. They've got 25 kids a class, and they're a small school. So I really just figured it made sense to make this by average class size so that it actually has some bearing on the challenges that the school is facing because of size.
Can I better understand why we're leaving pre-K out? Because they also help increase their numbers at the school with incorporating
The only
pre-K.
reason I left them out is because pre-K is still so unsettled. And sometimes it's only 10 hours a week and I didn't get them out of count that.
But I like to give them the opportunity to count. I mean, that's again, Canaan is, I think even my MMUSD school district, they're doing the pre-K in-house. And I don't know what that, I mean, like, I just don't wanna,
I did it only for simplicity. That's what I
Okay.
answered.
So maybe I can, explain what the potential practical impact of excluding
Okay.
pre-K is. So the exclusion is exclusive to this section. So that's the first thing to note, right? It's about the small schools and sparse schools grants. There's two, at least to me, obvious changes that this would result in. One is by excluding pre-K from the enrollment count for purposes of determining what is a small school, you potentially make more schools, small schools eligible for this grant. So you potentially, I don't know, but you potentially expand the number of schools that would fit in this bucket. On the other hand, the size of the grant that you receive is determined based on the small schools' 2-year average enrollment, which would now exclude the pre-K count. So you might expand the set of schools you would expect to qualify for the small schools grant, but potentially shrink the size of the grant. If that makes sense. That to me is the practical consequence of doing this. And I'm happy to walk through.
I mean, I'm sure it makes sense. I just need to like
Yeah.
have it written
Yeah.
on the board.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes,
And maybe it will become clear if I walk through what's on page 71. So I'm just gonna be talking definitions. I think it's gonna be pretty intuitive. The average grade size, that is the quotient that results from dividing a school's 2-year average enrollment. So that's the count that's already used. It's taking what is your average enrollment for the 2 most recent years. Then you would take that and you would divide it by the number of grades above pre-K that your school offers. And that would tell you the intuitive concept, your average grade size. Enrollment, as you were hinting at, means the number of students and the new addition here in kindergarten through grade 12. So to the exclusion of pre-K, who are enrolled in a school operated by the school district. And then your small school would be a public school that in language has an average grade size of fewer than 12 students. So instead of as past, the old version has fewer than 100 pupils in 2-year average enrollment, you now have as an average grade size of fewer than 12 students. And again, that's taking how many grades does your school offer, dividing your 2-year average enrollment, which counts all above pre-K students, averages across 2 years, you divide it by the number of grades, then it gives you an average grade size. And this says the numerical prong that is checked to determine whether you're eligible for a small school grant will be that you have an average grade size of fewer than 12 students. I should say, to complicate what I said earlier, because you were dividing by grades,
yeah.
it's going to be a wash, right? You've decreased the number of students that count in the enrollment, but you've also lowered the number by which it's divided because you've removed pre-K. So I don't know what the numbers will be, who qualifies and who doesn't without it. That's probably part of the question that you're going to have. But yes, it's now a determination based on average grade size, and you would expect that the grant itself, which is determined on an enrollment that would now exclude pre-K, would be lower because literally the enrollment count would be lower. Because you're taking your enrollment, multiplying it by a dollar figure. If you decrease the enrollment, then you're getting fewer students.
Yeah, so I guess overall, I don't want to penalize schools, small schools that are doing pre-K in-house, because that probably means they also don't have a lot of other pre-K around them, and that they're being more efficient by bringing pre-K in. I think that our MMUSD district that does pre-K in-house pointed out that the excess spending penalty penalizes them for actually having pre-K in-house. And I don't want to do that.
I just didn't know how to quickly how to deal with the fact that pre-K is fewer hours and everything. So
Ideally, it's not. So if they do have pre-K on
No,
campus, they're
I-
probably doing it at
not arguing
40
the point,
hours.
just like I said, I just did it for simplicity again. To make apples to apples. So, yes,
Again, just for clarity, so small sparse schools, if the committee could remind me, does the State Board of Education still have an active study or analysis out there that is feeding back to us for this answer? Don't they have a,
You have a memo on this, but there are some updates in the bill as well. I think they may be in bed sections, but you'll recall that one of the requests in the memo that you'd received was that on an ongoing basis, while the state board was making those recommendations, they were suggesting that AOE was better positioned to make the annual determination itself based on standards consistent with those pieces. I think that the bill contains measures to cap AOE with making that regular determination. And I think there's a rulemaking piece as well to put into rules the recommendation. that you
my real question is, does it conflict with the direction we're giving here?
Sure. So that's something I thought about before I came up to the chair is there something about the memo, for instance, that is keyed off it being 100 in school rather than a grade size determination? My quick read was, and it's truly just a quick cursory read, was that I don't think that this is in conflict with the memo that you received. You would want to talk to those folks. But I have it pulled in front of me. The general framework that's set out, I'm just going to read a line from it. Since small and sparse are already established thresholds in statute, the committee's definition of by necessity should determine whether a school meets one or both statutory thresholds is small sparse as a function of unavoidable geographic or demographic circumstances. So you'll recall the factors they set out related to safe travel times, whether it's difficult to consolidate and the like. I don't know that any of those are necessarily hindered by a shift, but you're correct to think about the fact that you switch the underlying statutory language on which someone is constructing rules. It raises the basic question, well, are you disrupting the process? That's the 12th instance of amendment. The 13th instance of amendment is section 67. It's a very minor one to explain. That's on page 121 of the big document that you're looking at. This is to, and I'll wait for a second just because I know you guys are flipping. This is specific directives for AOE rulemaking on school construction. And this is to propose pushing back essentially by a year the required date for rulemaking to occur. The House construct had March 31st, 2027, so pretty quickly. And this is pushing back roughly a year. In the instance of amendment, it's March 1st, 2028. But I know Jeff is just compiling this huge document to give you guys helpful information. So just know that when you see the, depending on other updates we make in the document, you may see this updated to March 1st, 2028. In any instance, the proposal is to push back by roughly a year that due date to provide more time for rulemaking, which is tied also, I think, to the school construction division staffing, right? Which there are positions, but you don't have the budget for those positions to be staffed out in the division. So simple update in that 13th instance of amendment is just moving back the date before rulemaking.
And we don't think that impacts other dates, like in this whole sequence of date changes, but it seems to cascade.
It is. I think my easy answer is not really, because the question was always going to be what was practically achievable anyway.
That's the last step.
Yeah, so it's, let's say you imposed a deadline of July 2nd, 2026. No one's going to make it, right? And I don't know if March 31st, 2027 is achievable, but this is fitting within the other parameters, but providing more time to do the work. So I take it to be, but maybe the chair has a different position. A pragmatic offering that doesn't disrupt other flows. It is true that the sooner you can get the rules, the better. But I would offer that one of the quicker ways to do that is to staff your school construction division. So. Okay, the 14th instance of amendment. This is section 74. You're not going to see anything there. I'll tell you what page that's on. On page 131. But just to remind you of what this actually is. Section 71 is the legacy debt aid section. That was the piece that said school districts eligible for 100% aid for bonds related to costs of renovation, facilities, construction that a district has as of the end of last year, December 31st, 2025. So that was a provision that created eligibility for cleaning the slate effectively for outstanding school construction debt at the end of last year. It did not identify a revenue source. In any event, it would have been subject to annual appropriation. So in the absence of revenue source, that aid would not have gone out. In the House construct that would be effective this summer without funding. And this proposal just strikes that legacy debt aid provision. Another approach you can take in the absence of revenue is to make it contingent like everything else with the foundation formula. But that the proposal here is just removing the legacy debt aid section.
Slated to potentially cost them $61 million a year out of the ed fund.
That's the maximum expected yearly impact.
That yearly impact is to make the debt service payments. And
Yes.
the question is that fair? And then all of Vermont pays for a handful of schools that funded, and also those schools that haven't funded have deferred maintenance to deal with. So the way they're paying place some level. So, and I think it's not something that needs to be dealt with now. We can see how the mergers go. It's not even tied to mergers, just simply paying off the debt that was found a lot. Struck me as something left out of is being fair.
Well, while we're just talking about any changes to the school construction piece, I think the language creation of new school governance structures, whatever, that's who gets priority. I don't know that I agree with that fuzzy language. I would say priority should go to regional high schools.
Yeah,
You can certainly be more specific. I think the thing that I was telling you guys yesterday, during the joint hearing as well, is there's kind of a generic language call out. This consolidation of school governance structures and improved educational access. That was intended to capture kind of the general purposes of the bill, but you can absolutely be more specific. The more specific you can be, particularly when it comes to the rulemaking, the clearer the agency will know what it needs to do.
Yeah, I don't like the fuzziness of that language, but I also, when I talk about the date by which rulemaking has to be done, I want to make sure we're not asking schools to envision certain forms of consolidation without any ability before the rulemaking happen to think about what that might look like. So I thought the piece about legacy debt was to kind of create a bridge that might help with conversations. It's not guaranteeing them that, but it might be saying they just built a regional high school or they just bonded for that. That's going to become the high school that the state is willing to pay for, even if they took on that debt before we were ready with the group. I'm just trying to make sure the sequencing doesn't sort of leave people not able to have real facilities conversations. If we're not giving them a bridge to say, we might consider some of this debt as part of the consolidation process, or
which I think they can do on their own.
We don't know what they're going to do. Certainly the way that Senator Ron Hinsdale is characterizing this is the kind of justification that we were hearing on the House side behind why to do the legacy debt aid provisions. The thinking was that you might affect even some of the incentive structure for folks choosing to merge or not, right? That the fact that someone holds a minimum debt could serve as a disincentive to joining up with them. Of course, they wouldn't know what the arrangement would be, but the thought was clear the slate so that it's not essentially part of the conversation that folks have. Of course, you can complicate the analysis there by saying someone with the debt may have new facilities that are attractive to someone without the debt. But that is certainly the kind of arguments that I was hearing on the House side as to why it was.
So we have the intro, we have the reports about how the consolidation discussions are going. We have now the interim one to identify where issues are emerging and whether this is going to be potentially.
I just don't want the school construction conversation to once again become so disconnected from the consolidation conversation that we've missed an opportunity. And I think I think there was that, I didn't talk to anybody in the House about this section, but one could guess from that they're trying to use school construction as a helpful tool in the conversation. And us saying, we're just gonna ignore anything that happened before this rulemaking in 2028 doesn't help us have real consolidation conversation, but something more flexible in 25.
Well, I want to argue the point, but there's total flexibility. I mean, people that, as they're talking about workers, they can talk about how to deal with things. The question is whether all of Vermont pays off that debt, like, without any of it being tied to workers. So,
Right. But well, I guess you said the question is it fair? I think each case will be unique if we're talking about a district that just built a high school.
and I think that's a fair point. Each case will be unique, and this is a point in paying it off. And so, I don't know, it just, and I think if it emerges as sticking points, then we can think about it. And we can think about how it would get by to actual merger before we pay off. I don't know.
Okay, that I'm open to. I just don't want to create more uncertainty, when we're trying to give them more carrots to merge. It's like the only carrot for merging.
So we do have a list of where the debt is that we can look at.
Perfect.
And in fact, we can post that page. So,
I only have one more thing, and it's not really something for me to explain. It's just that the 15th instance updates the effective dates at the end of the bill to reflect all of the new things that you have here and will remove the deleted sections, their corresponding effective dates. If you have any questions about the sections I just spoke to, I'm happy to talk about them. In general, I can say that most of the school construction sections that I have go effective this summer. Any pieces that spoke to SD, the supplemental district spending, transition pieces would obviously be contingent, like the foundation formula effective July 1, 2030, provided the newly updated section 71. All those conditions are met.
So if it's school construction, it's considered our section to tinker with versus finance or
joint jurisdiction on that.
Okay.
Construction on these sections at the end, it's joint jurisdiction. I think the way the House bill is written, as it relates to the foundation formula, if you bond, the bonded indebtedness is not, doesn't count toward your.
If you're asking in the future, the idea is that there is no cap on supplemental district spending applied to school construction expenditures. I think that's what you
You
might
can
be.
exceed the cap if it's propane.
Yeah, it's possible that the cap would actually be small enough that you could pursue a school construction project, right? So it's say that's not going to stop you. Other things might stop you, like can you finance it, but the cap will not be the thing that stops you.
Well,
We did well.
we've got another walkthrough.
Don't get me so excited.
Let me,
What, I didn't hear what you said.
I said, are we voting now?
Oh, yeah, let's, yeah. So. We'll pick up tomorrow.
no, just a process question. See, the morning committees that yes, we're gonna have to work on this. Yeah, we definitely need a bigger room.
Oh,
Sure, it's gonna have all.
that's actually a fair, maybe, let me see if we can do something about that.
And the house guys will be.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Let me know.
Well, one question is,
Invite you guys to this year.
We'll continue. I'm sorry, we're 10.
Like that.
Yeah.
I don't know who we're requesting maps from, but I'd like to see the CTE districts overlaid on one of these. I don't
Okay.
really know if you want the CSUS, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I think we are ready to adjourn, right?
We have to.
So we have, so we have, so actually, let's recap the bidding for tomorrow. Think we know where we were. Probably not be, we have a little bit of on both. Absenteeism and miscellaneous.
We're trying to vote those two back.
Well, we'll see, because we have the one issue, so we'll potentially.
There was the miscellaneous, I think was either tomorrow or Friday, depends on.
Tomorrow, on the miscellaneous, we have the agency coming in. And then we have the issue of the farmers.
For miscellaneous and VSBA, BPNEA and the Pledge Council and that's for 9:30. After the VSI, I know about the AOB, and I think that's it.
We'll
Section of the
respond on-
miscellaneous.
Yeah, we'll respond on both. We'll be efficient. So 9:31 and 9:40.